Welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Welcome to my bar.
I'm very happy to be here, Sangu. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
Would you like a glass of whiskey? Any preference?
What do you recommend?
I actually recommend the Macallan.
Yes.
15 years, triple cask matured. What do you think?
I think I can do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know it's a bit early, but I think we could have a little drop of whiskey. Yeah. The privilege that I have is I can also drink too, although I'm a bartender.
You should enjoy that privilege, the full.
Yes, full privilege.
Come
Santé. En santé. Yeah. Well, I know that you are a correspondent for Le Figaro in France.
Okay.
Many Korean audiences may have heard about Le Figaro, but I don't think many Korean knows what Le Figaro represents in France, and what kind of newspaper it is, and how it differs from other major French newspapers like Le Monde.
Yeah. Well, the Koreans probably heard of Le Figaro because it's one of the main protagonists of a Mozart opera.
Ah, yes.
But Le Figaro is a daily newspaper. It's actually one of the oldest newspaper in the world because it was created in 1826.
Wow.
So that means more than 150 years ago.
Yeah,
so under the Joseon dynasty.
Yes.
And it has been a historic newspaper. It's still today one of the two leading newspaper in France. And it is a historic paper because a lot of great names have written in it, like including Marcel Proust or like François Mauriac, like some great writers. And today is still one of the two main newspapers with Le Monde in France. So Le Figaro is a center-right newspaper, a bit more conservative, and it is today's enjoying like every big newspaper a big transformation toward a more digital model, digital model of paywall, like a subscription. So it's still today like one of the major paper in the country.
How long have you now arrived in Korea? I mean, how long have you been here now?
Well, I came to Korea 11 years ago.
11 years ago?
As a Korea correspondent, and I was here for 5 years. Then I went to Shanghai as a Shanghai correspondent, then came back to Korea. Then now I'm between Seoul and China, but so I'm a China East Asia correspondent, and I also cover Korea. So I'm between Korea and Seoul, and so I've been back and forth in Korea, but also I've been covering most of the Eastern Asia region, including Southeast Asia, which you know very well too. So a lot of China these days because China is the big player in the region. But of course, I'm still fascinated by Korea, both South and North, because I had a chance to go to North Korea sometimes and write some books also about it.
So tell me about your experience in North Korea. What did you find, and what was your book about?
Well, like as journalists, everyone is of course fascinating to go the other side, especially when you've been stationed in Seoul because it's just next door. I remember one day being in North Korea near Kaesong on the DMZ, visiting some outposts there, and then you could even get the signal from South Korea. So I remember sending a Kakao message to friends in Seoul from North Korea because it was so great. And it was fascinating to me because I was standing there and really 40K kilometer, probably I could be here in Seoul, at my home. But to get there, you have to go all around through Beijing, come back. It's a fascinating place. It's especially when we know Korea because it's Korea and it's also a different Korea. So it's of course a fascinating experience. It's also a very challenging place as a journalist because frankly we cannot do a proper work there. We are under control all the time. So it's more like I often say when you go to North Korea, you're not doing journalism, you're doing impressionism. So you can, you know, like Monet, you can see a lot of little spots there and try to give a little picture, but maybe the core will always evade you. So it's part of the fascinating thing in our job is to be able to go to this kind of place when there's no COVID. It's possible to travel and explore this kind of different frontier.
So COVID is something that is restricting your job as well. I mean, by not being able to go to places where you need to be for covering the stories and all that. Especially, you told me that you were supposed to go to China, but that is so difficult.
Yeah, the border has been closed. I mean, as for many other people in the business, of course, COVID is a major challenge, but especially for people like me, where our job is to go in the field, and our job is also, you know, so these days, 80-90% of what I do is on the phone or on Zoom, like most of the business people. But so we can do story. I write a lot of articles about what's going on in the region through these means, and we can still do the job. But of course, you know, when people read an article, what they want is flesh. They want flavor. You know, when I go to interview someone, I want to see. I see the decor, and I can bring to the readers some atmosphere that are essential also to make a story vivid. We're not just analysts doing a dry work. We're not doing reports. We're doing something more more flavory, and of course that part is missing these days because we cannot go much in the field, and of course I miss traveling around the world just to meet people in real, because it's a different thing when you meet someone face to face like we're doing now, or if we are talking on the phone.
Exactly.
Talking on the phone is very interesting too, but meeting face to face brings different things.
Yes, different nuances, and you can see the expression.
Facial expression. You know, in an interview, it's so much about this. The body language tells you a lot in an interview when you're a journalist. So all these things, of course, we are missing in the COVID era, and we have to adjust. So we are adjusting, and it might last for a long time. So it's a major challenge, and of course it's challenging in some countries like China. It's offer the government an opportunity to restrict even further the ability to report freely on what's happening. So that's another additional challenge, I would say.
You mentioned that you wrote a book about North Korea. What was the title of the book?
Well, I wrote one book about with a North Korean defector, like Kim Un-soon. So it was called, in English, it's called 1,000 Miles to Freedom. So it was one of the first books with a young female defector who escaped from North Korea through China, Mongolia, and it's a story. And she now lives in Seoul, and she's a very positive, impressive person. So we wrote this book together, and then. That was like a testimony, as a witness, because she survived the great starvation in the 90s. And then later I wrote another book, more like this one is only in French, La Piste Kim, which is more focusing about my traveling experience in North Korea, and especially Kim Jong-un, the way he's been establishing itself in the region. And
how, so after talking to these defectors from North Korea and your experience of going to North Korea, I've also been to North Korea a few times, and I saw the poverty of it all. I mean, there was no electricity in Kaesong in the winter. I cannot see it when it got dark. I cannot see any house that has any kind of lighting. It was really a very eerie feeling. And all the houses and buildings were, I would say, something that I would see in the 1960s or 50s in South Korea. And it was the city center of Kaesong. I mean, Kaesong used to be a very big commercial city, but now it's almost a one of those slum kinds of places. I was very shocked at that, actually.
Yeah, Kaesong, I also had experience there about that. But what is fascinating is the between two. Like I remember there was a span of almost 5 years between two of the trip I did there, and it was fascinating 5 years later to see so much change, especially in Pyongyang. I mean, how the number of cars, the number of, you could find now taxis in Pyongyang.
Really?
You could go to shops, you could go to restaurant. I mean, there's been a quite
big
spectacular development, I think, economic development over the last at least 15 years, and you could see it with your own eyes when you were in the capital. But of course, Pyongyang is a kind of a
showpiece.
It's a showpiece. This is where the elite lives. So it doesn't tell you the full picture about North Korea. And the countryside is still very poor, and in many areas it's still changing. But overall, you could see not only in Pyongyang, even in Wonsan, in other cities, things have been improving on a day-to-day basis. So that was also fascinating to see that people are a bit well off, but of course still shortage of water, shortage of electricity at some time, even in the capital sometimes there's a cut. So it's a complex picture, but clearly North Korea has been changing. It's not just a static society. There's a lot of dynamics at play.
Do you think this is due to the leadership of Kim Jong-un, or since Kim Jong-un has come into power, you think the changes is taking place since then?
Well, I mean, what seems that the economy took off is what happened is actually you had in the 90s this terrible famine.
Oh yeah.
That was terrible and killed many people. But the irony is that after that, people realized if I want to survive, I need to count on myself. And then the leadership was not able to feed anymore its own people.
So the distribution system collapsed.
Yeah, and so people just took their own destiny into their own hands, and the government had no other option to let people survive as they wish, and they start to do more business. They start to do like at the beginning it's a very tiny trade, but step by step, after many years, this little river becomes bigger. You have cash, you have some people with money. So, I mean, to say it's actually the irony is that the regime couldn't feed its population, and then but he let the people then find their own means, and so that's why you probably have seen the last since the 90s, you've seen gradually a kind of domestic private economy that has been tolerated by the regime. And of course, Kim Jong-un, you can see that he's trying to encourage it because he sees that's a way he wants his country to flourish, because that's also the way for him probably to stay in power as much as possible. So he's encouraging this, but at the same time, the superstructure, the structure is still there, and is still benefiting the elite of the system, and still a huge constraint because also of the sanction around.
Market economy, North Korean style.
Yeah, and still very much controlled by, of course, the apparatus, and plus you had the context, international context, sanction, and now I think COVID. is increasing the constraint on the economy, and the border with China is
absolutely closed. Anyone trying to break that blockade will be shot on the spot.
That seems to be the case, and that's a big implication on the economy, because it means that trade with China has been essential, and a lot of traders were making money by trading over the border. But if this source of cash is shrinking, that's going to have an impact on the domestic economy. So the COVID, I think, on economies like North Korea or underdeveloped economies, it's very severe. It's more severe in a place like here,
or the West,
or the West,
Europe.
because there's not much of a safety net, and people really need that cash.
Yeah. So the people in the lower end of the chain are the ones who are suffering the most by not being able to feed themselves. Extreme sort of conditions. Now, you've been in Korea now for how many months?
I've been here since March. I've been here.
March. So, wow. And since March, that's when the COVID really was on the sort of rise, and it was becoming quite serious. So you were not able to travel since March outside of Korea?
I went one time to France to see my family.
Okay.
But otherwise, we cannot go anywhere because all the region, the border are closed. So
yeah.
So
even in France.
Well, in France, you could go as a French national. It was possible. I'm talking about Asia, my base where I have to work.
China.
The region, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, where all these places have been locked. You know, Hong Kong. You know, these places where a lot of news has been happening.
Yeah.
Normally we would be flying there. Or you see Thailand this day in Bangkok. You have all these protests. That's the right place to report.
Yes, yes.
You cannot go at the moment, so, or you have to go through quarantine, which of course is a big
2 weeks.
hurdle.
2 weeks quarantine.
Yeah, in most countries.
Most countries, even Korea. Yeah, you have to. If you go outside and come back, 2 weeks quarantine. Well, that is inconvenience. But having said that, so I mean, having been in Korea and not being able to go elsewhere to cover stories, how are you coping? I mean, you must feel very frustrated, and sometimes you're in the city all the time. Have you been outside of Seoul?
Yeah, so we're trying to get out of the. Yeah, I've been frustrated too. You know, my job is to be very mobile, to go in the field. So I've been. A few days ago, I just escaped out of the city. And I decided I went to Gangwon-do, to the bit of a remote office, writing from there, both to Soraksan, and I went to Yangyang. Just want to breathe, and you know, it refreshes your mind also to get out of the city. And our job is not a static place. My job is not to go to the office. My job is to be in the field. So it's about facing different different context, experience. So we do what we can in this bubble we are in at the moment, and we are looking at ways to sometime maybe go to other places if there is some kind of travel bubble emerging. That's really hoping, at least in Asia. Let's see. Let's be optimistic. Let's be positive.
I mean, we know now that we have to live with COVID. I mean, it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. So we need to be more, I suppose, more wise in how we live with COVID and how we try to minimize, of course, the spread of the virus. But at the same time, we cannot stop everything just because of the virus.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you think France is, I mean, your country, how do you think it's managing this living with COVID?
There's a big difference in Europe and especially in
Asia.
France at the moment are going through extremely severe so-called second wave, and the situation is pretty grim there. It's the number of new cases every day is crazy. It's like more than 50,000 a day. So it's like in one day you have 2 times what Korea has since the beginning of the pandemic. It's crazy. It's insane. So Europe is going through a very tough time, and it's extremely worrying is that the situation there now, people are back in a kind of lockdown. They are working from home. There's a huge restriction on circulation even within the country. And the problem, they already went through a severe lockdown of last spring. So this is the second one. So this is hurting the economy extremely badly. You know, at least in Korea here, we never had a lockdown. So the economy has been challenged, but there was never like a stop. It's still going on. But when your economy is stuck, that the cost is extremely heavy, and now we're going back to this in Europe, and the problem is that we don't know how long it's gonna last. It's like the second wave is so powerful that we might have this situation for several months, which is extremely severe for the economy, but also for people, for human being, you know, for social relationship, for families, for everyone. It's a huge strain on the society. So it's extremely, it's quite a worry, because it's also when you have big strain like this, you also have strain on politics, on society. People get angry, people get
Yes, of
desperate.
course. Yes.
So
You know what China is saying? China is saying that authoritarian regimes are better in controlling the COVID, and said China is very successful in controlling and containing COVID, whereas the Western countries, European countries, and especially the US, because obviously liberal democracy demands basic rights of human beings. They will not give that up. And sometimes when the government or the establishment requests or demands that the citizens comply to certain rules and regulation, they defy that, because they say that this is a obstruction of one's fundamental rights.
Yes.
So when you look at this kind of differences, where Asian countries are more obedient in the sense and cooperating with government policy in terms of wearing masks, in terms of having their personal information registered wherever you go. I mean, this in turn can be considered to be really an obstruction of personal rights, of your privacy, but still they cooperate and they take it as something that a community should do in order to do that. But the fact of the matter is, some of those information are abused and misused, and sometimes actually it can come back to you in that sense. What do you think the difference of that European very strong commitment for personal rights and privacy?
Yeah, the COVID is bringing us it's a huge dilemma between fighting the epidemic and respecting individual rights. It's clear that the epidemic, facing that kind of such a contagious epidemic, discipline is key, and you have to apply very strict rule if you want to stop the wave, and like it's been managed in countries like here, like in Korea, but of course it's an extremely challenging situation, because you don't know how far you go in controlling and imposing very strict sanction. I think the COVID is a kind of a crash test for governance. You know? It's the way a country responds to COVID effectively implies a lot of different factors, and I think you're absolutely right about I think there's before talking about politics, we have to talk about culture. And indeed, the notion of collectivity, we see in Asia, people think more about the group, and they are more ready to, let's say, wear the mask, to respect the other person around me, and also there's more social pressure about.
Yes.
You know, people are afraid, like, I don't want to have the virus, because I'm worried of virus, because I don't want to be seen as the black sheep of the group. That's a very powerful incentive, and that's been working at play, I think, in Asia. That's cultural. And yeah, of course, you're right about China. China has been managing pretty effectively now today the virus, while it actually failed at the beginning. And at the beginning, of course, they're trying to hide the virus, and they responded too late, and that's how it became such a big thing too. But now in China, the situation is pretty good, with very few cases, and of course for China and for President Xi Jinping, this is a great win, because they can establish that they see, look, our authoritarian model is working so much better. Look at what's happening in the US, look at what's happening in Europe. In all this democracy, they are failing. But of course, this narrative is politically charged, and it missed the point, the fact that you have some democracy like Korea, but also Taiwan. I think the country who dealt best with the COVID was actually Taiwan, which is a democratic China, and they are the first who saw, even before the Chinese authority, that there's something going on in Wuhan. Immediately they took action, even faster than Korea, and they have like I think only 7 deaths people. It's insane.
Wow.
So of course, actually some democracy did a really good job and a far better job than China, because they didn't go to a lockdown like Korea or Taiwan. No lockdown. So the cost on people, on the economy is smaller. But then having said that, you know, it's also easier for island like Taiwan, or even South Korea is actually a virtual island, because you have North Korea, so you have only one or few airports.
Yeah.
It's easier to control this kind of territory.
Exactly.
And you know, Europe, EU, they have this fundamental. The founding principle of the EU is like freedom of circulation for goods and people. So that's like a cornerstone of the EU. So that's a big challenge for the EU to decide to close borders. It's really like going at the heart of the European project. So I think that's why Europeans have been very slow at responding. I think they didn't take seriously the virus at the beginning. They didn't think it would come so quickly across the globe, and nobody believed it. I mean, I was in Beijing at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was in lockdown, and even in lockdown in February, I would never thought that actually this would be the situation in my hometown Paris. Just almost 2 months later. Even me, I was right in the middle of the crisis. I couldn't fathom that this could happen. It was so surreal. I think nobody was much prepared, but everybody did with what they had, and I think countries like Korea also were in a way better prepared, because you had the SARS before, which prepared the population and the authorities. And in Korea especially, you had also, strangely, turned out that the MERS, we had the MERS in 2015, which was kind of a wake-up call for the governments here. They realized how vulnerable they were if there was an epidemic striking. So I think Korea was also in some way lucky that they had a kind of huge rehearsal a few years back that prepared the country very well. Yes. So you have to see all this picture, and but clearly there's a failure in the Western countries, democracies in Europe, in US, because they were supposed to be prepared. They claimed they were prepared, especially the US, and we can see that we can see the number of dead people there. It's a disaster.
Yes, it's a disaster. Yes. One of the ironies of this is that this time of the year in Korea, we will always see traveling from China, because the wind blows eastward. But we're seeing clear skies, and the air is very clean because of China's shutdown of all its factories and businesses. And for that, we are very grateful that we can breathe and see clear skies. That's the irony of it. But now that China is successfully containing this, and their factories are reopening and all this, we're seeing some pollution coming our way from China once again, that sort of thing. Now, we are in the middle of seeing the US presidential election. I mean, it's very complicated, and it's really a mess in my eyes, because we have very different, I suppose, system, and the US is very much a federal government. Therefore, the states have so much authority and freedom. So all states are different in how they calculate and how they count the votes, and etc. It appears that Biden is almost the winner, but President Trump is contesting that by saying that he will go take it to Supreme Court and all this. Now, as a country that is heavily affected by the result of who becomes U.S. president, the new U.S. president, because of the stark differences between the two candidates, two personalities. We know what Trump is like. We experienced him 4 years. We know that Biden will be different from Trump in the sense that he will be more of a traditionalist, going back to the values and the strategy that as a global leader, because Trump says America first. That's I think the two fundamental difference. One is America first, one is a global leader leading the way, kind of thing. Let's say that Biden comes into office and becomes president.
I think regardless of what's gonna happen, of course the two candidates have been. I mean, it's been a very abrasive election, so they are portraying themselves as very different. But if you look, I think if we look, regardless of what's gonna happen with Donald Trump, I mean, you can say that Donald Trump, like it or not, has changed the world in a way, and a lot of the legacy of Trump is here to stay. Regardless of what the Democrats gonna say, is that there are things that are gonna be here to stay. It's like a tough line on China, like a far more still focus on domestic issue, and like, of course Trump has been saying make America great again, America's first, and Biden as a Democrat will insist on the alliance. So Biden will change the tone. The tone will be much more friendly to allied country like South Korea, like Europeans, like Japan. They will be like, the tone will be much more friendly, so a lot of countries will welcome that. But if you look at the substance, is there going to be such a dramatic change on some of the key issue? Like America is increasingly looking at Asia. This is the real battleground, meaning that they are disengaging from Europe, from the Middle East. This is going to stay.
I see.
It's going to stay, even if it's Biden or Trump. And the challenge, the strategic contest with China is only going to increase in the coming years. That's regardless of who's the president. And now it's a bipartisan issue that we need to be tougher on China. That's what Washington believes. It's what DC believes these days. Democrat, Republican agree on this. It's more about the means, the tactic, how to get there, but it's going to be a tough contest. So this is the big picture, I think, and this is the big picture for a country like South Korea, is that the coming years you're going to see increasing tension between your key ally, strategic security ally, which is the United States, and your biggest
trading
economic
partner,
which is China. And this is there, and this is a huge challenge for countries like here or other countries in the region, because in DC, whether it's Biden or Trump, it's going to be a tough approach on China. They really see it as a challenge, and it's going to be across the board, like technology, economy, military, ideology,
even values.
And values. There's going to be Trump has been very strong, and Trump and Pompeo has been very strong at insisting on, like, pointing out the Communist Party, the authoritarian rule, the violation of human rights. But Democrats will insist on human rights even further, and that's going to antagonize China. So,
do you think that Biden's and the U.S. policy to concentrate more in Asia is because of the direct sort of conflict between U.S. and China? Do you think that is the reason why U.S. presidents will be more concentrating in Asia?
I think now, for the U.S., the key competitor strategic is China. I mean, so this is where the battleground is, and what is at stake is the leadership, the global leadership, and it's also a stake about economic leadership, technology leadership. These things now the US leaders know exactly this is the key point. So they need to focus their resources on this, and they can see we are seeing a growing assertive China under Xi Jinping, also economically much bigger actor. Therefore, in the coming years and decade, China is only going to assert further itself in the region. So Asia is the real battleground for the two big power, and this is here to stay. And every country in the region is going to have to adjust to that.
So in a way, will we see another sort of Cold War where we have two different blocks facing, contesting each other? Do you think that's what we'll be seeing, or will it be more flexible, more sort of fluid?
Well, it's a complex. Of course, this word Cold War has been used more and more recently, and it's quite a tempting one. It's, of course, we are seeing this kind of Cold War perfume coming, and there are some signs. If you look at technology, for example, like what the sanctions are doing on Huawei, on the semiconductor the US are taking, these are really squeezing China. They're basically telling countries, that means that companies like here, like Samsung, SK Hynix, they cannot, or TSMC in Taiwan cannot sell their chips to China. So there's clearly an attempt to decouple, and you might see in some field a decoupling, like in technology you might have two markets. You might have the Chinese market and you might have the rest of the world market. So whether we're going to go to a so-called Cold War, we have two blocks, that's a much more, that's a long way to go, because these days, if you compare to the 60s or the 50s, the economies are far more intertwined, global supply chain are integrating China, other countries. It's a very, very integrated economy. So to get back to a real Cold War, I think it will be a different picture. It might be differing depending on the sectors. So you're gonna have growing antagonism, but I'm not sure we go to a classic Cold War. History never repeats itself exactly. So it would be, we are going to definitely for a major. That's going to be the main structure for the
major contest.
Axis.
Yes,
the major axis, if you understand the world in the coming decade, is going to be the U.S.-China tension. That's for sure. So that's the axis. But where are we going to see two blocks? Well, ask Korea. If there is a block, Korea example would be the big problem.
Korea is, yes, basically the most seriously dilemma-stricken country, I would say, because it really does heavily depend on both countries. Economically on China, militarily, and also in terms of values, democratic values. And so it's very difficult for Korea to choose a side, but I think as time goes by, as the conflict intensifies, I think the US and China will say, pick a side. And Korea would have to come to a point where they have to decide on which is more important for Korea. But having said that, Biden's presidency will at least go back to the so-called international issues like rejoining the climate change,
the Paris Agreement,
Paris Agreement, and also maybe back to agreeing with the Iran nuclear agreement as well, and he will not probably do what Trump had done of asking the alliances to pay outrageous amounts of money for security umbrella kind of issue. But as you said, yes, Xi Jinping in China has declared that they will control South China Sea in 2025, and they will militarily even contest anyone who uses that, accesses that channel without their permission. So do you think a potential possible conflict can arise in that region, as well as, of course, the two Koreas, North and South Korea, is also an area that can be dangerous
I think
as well.
you're right about. I mean, South China Sea is one of the flashpoints we have to watch in the coming years. Is that for China, it's strategic, and it's both strategic, militarily, economically, but also politically, in the face of its own domestic public opinion that is extremely patriotic, nationalist. They regard South China Sea as theirs, and they're claiming 90% of those seas, while other countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia are also saying they are claiming some part of these waters, these strategic waters. So this is going. China is building up artificial islands. They are building military base on it. They're trying to deny access to the U.S. Navy and other military. They want to say this is like a China lake.
Yes.
So here is a very important issue, because for a country like Korea, at the moment Korea doesn't want to talk about South China Sea. The U.S. would like South Korea to be more vocal and at least say something, or potentially send some ships to do this so-called freedom of navigation exercise, like the US are doing, or some European country like France, US, or UK are doing. But South Korea doesn't want to talk about it because they are worried to anger China. But here it's a good example. So some people in the current South Korean government are saying, if we do this, we're going to anger China, so this is dangerous for us. But then all the oil, all the energy source coming from Middle East to Korea, they are going through all this sea.
Yeah.
So what is the strategic interest for South Korea? Is it that this sea remain international waters with safe transit,
free passage,
or that a big power like China take control of this sea, these strategic waters, and basically have a indirect or direct control on all the transit there of your energy source? That's a good example where South Korea need to think about strategic national interest. So I think about South Korea, the real challenge today, beyond choosing between China and US, they don't want to choose, and they're right. I mean, no country in the region want to choose. They want to be friend with both, and they want to edge.
Yeah.
But still, South Korea, the problem of South Korea today is that they are obsessed with North Korea.
Yes, yes.
And they don't want to see that they have to enlarge their vision to a regional strategic vision. That these days North Korea is just a sideshow. It's one part of a bigger puzzle, which is US-China rivalry in East Asia. And if you want to play that game, you need to understand the game is regional. And so if you want to have progress on North Korea, you're gonna have to look at other issues in the region, like South China Sea, Taiwan. You can't just
Hong Kong.
You can't just ignore that. So that's the big challenge, I think, for South Korea ahead, is that South Korea in the past few decades has been obsessed by the peninsula for good reason, because it's like a divisional peninsula. It's extremely important for South Korea, for Korean people in general. But the new game is that you need to enlarge your vision, and you need to look at the bigger picture. And that requires for policymakers to open their eyes beyond the peninsula, look south, because this is where the big battle is happening. And you mentioned South China Sea, but the other big spot you really need to watch even more is Taiwan.
Korea needs to understand that all this will have a tremendous effect on Korea. We cannot ignore that, because if Korea does not understand the implications that it has to Korea, then therefore, just by sort of staying away from the issue and not acknowledging it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go away. It's there to stay, and it will happen, and it will have an effect on Korea. Yeah, I agree with you there. So the US has asked Korea to be more active with the Quad arrangement, Quad Plus. And Korea, the current government has already said that it's not a good idea. And maybe Korea, if there is a change of government in 2 years' time, maybe they will be different. But at the moment, the Moon Jae-in government is very much fixated on North Korea and wants to see some kind of momentous achievement in regards to relations between the two Koreas. And they're trying to do everything focused on that, nothing else. That's the problem, as you say. It's all interconnected. Because Korea, if it wants to, as you said, wants to improve relations with North Korea, it has to have a lot of backing from other countries, regional as well as non-regional, US, Southeast Asia, even Europe. But Korea is just focusing on Korea. That's the problem. And what do you think the Korean government, the current Korean government, is lacking in terms of establishing better relations with its key ally, which is the US? I see some hints of US-South Korea relations wobbling. Do you agree to that?
Well, I mean, this is what we just said before. The US are asking South Korea to be more engaged in the regional dimension, and of course, more robust in criticizing China on some of the key points you mentioned. So that's a big problem for the future, because the US is going to be increasingly obsessed with China. So that's one point. But for South Korea, I think what they need to do is to diversify, and they're trying to do. That's why the Moon Jae-in has this Southern policy: go to Southeast Asia. You have to diversify your alliance. Also, maybe go more to Europe. You should not all invest on US and China, and of course, you have to probably reduce your exposure to the China risk. And actually, Korean companies are doing this. You know, Samsung is already withdrawing most of its activity in China. Most big Korean companies have learned a lesson from the THAAD crisis, like what happened to Lotte. They can see the risk.
Yeah.
So I think there is things happening, but it needs to be more assertive. And again, the North Korea issue is one piece of a bigger puzzle. And of course, nothing will happen there without China. But the more you reduce your exposure to China, the more you have leverage then to negotiate with Beijing. And of course, South Korea cannot reject China. It's not their interest neither. But they need. It's all about leveraging. The question is whether you can have a negotiating position where you can accept some stuff but also reject some other stuff, and to do this you need to have other options.
I think according to Chinese declaration and the new sort of collective party conference, they said that they're going to concentrate on the local economy instead of in the past it's all exports to the world and all that.
They want to refocus on domestic.
Yes, because the outside world is now becoming more and more sort of restrictions and blocked because of the US. So, and they feel that they can grow by 4%, above 4%, and they will be able to reach that goal, the target that they intend. And then they will be the global leader. How do you think the Chinese have the right calculation? They can do without the world, the rest of the world? They can do it on their own?
They have this new concept President Xi Jinping outlined, this so-called dual circulation, which is a kind of a new strategy that say we need to refocus on our domestic market, strengthen our domestic ability, especially catch up in key technology sector like semiconductor where they are lagging behind. But at the same time, pick and choose what's happening around, like market around the world. So they're not going to close the door fully to the outside world, and they might even open some sectors, like financial. But the core is that China is domestic standard. What China is interested in is develop its own country, its own for the benefit of its own people, and that's their focus. So they're gonna be working first for their own domestic agenda, and this is a reality. And they think the stronger they get domestically, the better they will be equipped to challenge the US in the coming years and decades. So recently the Chinese Communist Party just outlined a new plan looking at 2035. So it's a 15-year plan.
Long breath.
So it tells you how they think about it. They're not thinking about next year. They have an agenda for 2035 to become they want to be by then a prosperous nation, like developed per capita, something more similar like what we have in Korea or in some Western country. They want to be a developed economy fully by 2035. So that's an ambitious plan, but that's where they're going. And of course, whether they can achieve it, there's some question, because still the domestic market in China is the consumption is still very weak, and they're still relying heavily on exports. And we can see that in the COVID era, exports are, there's a lack of demand on the EU, US. There is some challenges ahead. So the challenge, the economic challenge for China are real and are massive too. But then, since the challenges are even maybe bigger for other countries, maybe relatively China might get out of the crisis strengthened. But it's a tough time for everyone, including China.
So, as you said, that the COVID crisis has made the global situation, especially the economic situation, very negative. But having said that, on the other side of the talk is that actually this reduction of producing and consuming is making nature return to life again, because our enormous appetite for consuming and manufacturing has made the earth and nature very seriously ill. So maybe we also should learn that going back to normal after COVID and doesn't necessarily have to mean the kind of development that we have been doing up till now. Maybe we should change our ways.
No, I agree with you. I think the COVID moment is kind of a reality check for us, for everyone in this planet, about nature, about challenge for the environment, but also about our lifestyle, about our health, about the way, what kind of life we want to live. So I think this is a important moment. A lot of people are self-reflecting about their own future, their own life, and that's actually it can turn out something very positive for the world. And definitely the world needs to adjust something. They can also, if you look at the economy, why the economy is becoming so dominated by huge actors. But that's the problem, is that these are all nice talk, nice thinking, but then there's the reality check. The reality check is the economy is badly hurt. People are losing their job. Some people are cash strapped. So the concern, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I fear that there's a kind of discrepancy. You have one axis about values, like, oh, we need to change, we need to do this better, we should not remake the mistake of the past. All nice talk, but then the reality bites, is that, oh, we are losing cash, so I have to reduce my investment in this, I have to survive. Many small companies gonna go bankrupt. So what's gonna happen? The big company like Amazon, Facebook are getting even bigger. So you might turn into a world where actually the trend, the inequalities, the imbalances we have seen growing over the last decade we want to change them, but the reality is maybe after the COVID they are even more exacerbated. So that's a pessimistic scenario. I hope it's not happening, but yeah, I hear the call and about let's change things. You know, we've been too far, but I really want to see whether this is going to translate into some real changes of policies. And my concern is that we might just be dealing with emergency, you know, measure that will be short-sighted, and like, you know, we're just gonna say, like for example, China. A lot of people will say, oh, you know, after COVID, say, oh, we are too exposed to China risk. We are too exposed. The China market is risky. We should reduce it. That's the sound analysis. But then the reality is like, oh, the economy globally is in turmoil. The only market that is booming now is China, so I can't afford to reduce China. So you might turn out as in a situation where actually it's the opposite happening. The opposite is that, you know, we have to survive and then forget about the nice ideas and.
As you said, the reality may not happen the way the ideal situation may become. Because I suppose we're wishful thinking kind of situation, and the world. I would like the world to become better, of course, and a lot of people agrees with that. But when you look at the reality, when you face with issues of economic difficulty, business going bad, etc., then you may very easy to fall back to the business like usual kind of situation. So I agree that is more likely than utopia. The situation become better. If you were to advise Korea, Korean government, the current government, how they should focus on their relations with the outside world, what would you think the most important policy that this government can adopt?
I think that the big risk with COVID is that we all become narrow minded and inward looking, because you know the border, we put all these quarantine borders, that's also symbolic. Like it could be happen to our mind that we go into a prolonged state where everybody is behind its doors and going inward looking, and China is actually doing this, and most countries are doing this at the moment because they're an emergency. I think for Korea, there is actually at the moment a challenge, but also an opportunity, because the region especially is changing because of all the things we discussed, including the rise of China. And Korea has done a good job with the COVID, and they need to resist the temptation of just closing in. They have an opportunity to attract more people, more investment. If you look at, for example, what's happening in Hong Kong, you know, Hong Kong used to be the financial hub, the place east meet west, like where the Western world and Asia meet. Now, because of the Beijing grip on Hong Kong as a financial hub is in big jeopardy. So where are all these people, these companies going to go? Where? They need another option in Asia, and there are not many options left. So some will go to Singapore. But I mean, Korea has a card to play here. They could attract more companies to Korea. But to do that, you need to be open-minded. You need to have a international, or at least regional outlook. You can't just afford to say, okay, let's play safe. Let's look at our own country, own peninsula. You need to basically enlarge your vision. So that would be my modest advice to Korea. Like, look up beyond the emergency of COVID. Look at the bigger picture in the region, and look at how you can actually save some opportunities if you making some bold move about being open, because there are some opportunity to be catched, and the region of course is going through going to become more and more challenging. But that's why many international players will want a safe haven. They want somewhere where they can be based, and this place is not going to be China. It's not going to be Hong Kong. So Korea has a card to play. So I would say that would be the advice. So enlarge your vision beyond the peninsula.
That is a very good advice and recommendation. I agree completely with what you say. And I hope that the Moon Jae-in government, one of the problems of Korea and Japan and probably Northeast Asian countries at large is that we are not that internationally outward looking. We are more sort of inward looking, especially even Japan, as you know. So, as you say, some of the Southeast Asian countries or the leadership of those countries are more internationally orientated, and some of these leaders in Japan and Korea, they don't even speak English, as you will know. So it's very good advice, and I hope that we do realize that for a country like Korea, which is a middle-sized, small, medium-sized country, needs to open up and become more international and to understand what is happening outside its own borders more than it is doing now, especially the politicians. So, thank you, Sebastian.
Thank
it was
you.
a pleasure. It was very nice chatting with you.
Yes.
And I hope we can do this again.
Yes, it's a pleasure. And of course, the final advice that, keep your life. I mean, we cannot change everything in the world. We can change our life. We can make our life better, and we can enjoy good thing in life, which is good people
like
and
single malt whiskey.
Single malt whiskey. Cheers.
Enchanté. Yes.